Welcome to The Explainer. So, millions of people decide to read the Bible every single year, right? But almost all of them completely hit a brick wall and abandon it the second they reach this exact book, Leviticus. But today, we're not just looking at some dry, dusty, ancient rulebook. No way. We're unlocking a high-stakes survival guide for literally living next to a pillar of fire. If you want to master deep topics like this one, go ahead and smash that like button, leave a comment down below, and let's dive straight into the picture book of salvation.
Okay, let's just start with the ultimate dilemma that sets the stage for everything here. Picture the scene. The Israelites are camped right at the base of Mount Sinai. God has miraculously rescued them from Egypt, and his literal glory has descended right onto the tabernacle. But, well, there's a massive glaring issue. God is perfectly holy, and the people are absolutely not. So how on earth can a sinful people survive his burning, unapproachable presence without just being completely consumed?
That brings us to Section 1, the problem of holiness, and bridging the gap at Mount Sinai.
The absolutely crucial point we've got to grasp first is that God's holiness isn't just about him being a good guy. It's an overwhelming, unapproachable level of perfection. He dwells in unapproachable light. And what that means is his very nature naturally rejects and reacts against the corruption of human sin. Think of it kind of like the sun, you know? It gives life and light, but if you get too close without any protection, you're going to burn up.
Now think about how wild the shift in the biblical timeline is right here. Genesis covers thousands of years of human history. Exodus speeds through hundreds of years. But then, the narrative pace suddenly slams on the brakes for Leviticus. The entire book happens in a single month at Mount Sinai. There's literally zero geographical movement. This dramatic pause is a huge blinking sign showing us just how vital these instructions were. His newly redeemed people had to learn how to actually survive in his presence.
Moving on to Section 2. Saying sorry and thank you, the grammar of the altar.
The sacrificial system can seem super complicated, but it actually gave the Israelites a brand new language. It was a way for them to express universally understood concepts, saying, "I'm sorry" and "thank you." The burnt sin and guilt offerings, those were mandatory ways to say, "I'm sorry, I really messed up." The grain offering was this voluntary, bloodless way to say, "Thank you so much for providing for me." And then the peace offering was this beautiful mashup of both, and it actually ended in a joyful shared barbecue, basically, a fellowship meal between God, the priests, and the worshiper.
Let's walk through the actual protocol of a sacrifice, because it wasn't just dropping something off at a temple. It was an incredibly tactile, hands-on experience. You'd bring an unblemished animal. Then, for step 2, you would physically lay your hands right on the animal's head. This was a deeply personal transfer of your sin. It was a stark, in-your-face realization that this innocent creature was taking your place, visually reminding you that the wages of sin is, in fact, death. After that, the animal was sacrificed, and the priest applied the blood to the altar to make atonement.
Now, the unique details here are absolutely fascinating because they reveal so much about God's heart. Take the guilt offering, for example. If you cheated your neighbor, you couldn't just pray and move on. You had to pay full restitution plus a 20% penalty fee to the person you wronged, because true repentance requires actually righting our wrongs. Also, check out the sin offering. It operated on a sliding scale. A wealthy leader had to bring a bull, but a poor person, they could bring birds or, honestly, even just a bit of flour. God made sure his forgiveness was completely accessible to absolutely everyone, no matter how much money they had.
Which brings us to Section 3, clean, unclean, and holy, defining the boundaries of life. Okay, we have to make a super vital distinction right here if we're going to understand this book. Ritual uncleanness was a temporary physical state indicating you were, pedagogically speaking, unsuitable to enter the temple. It wasn't about primitive hygiene and, this is huge, it wasn't necessarily a sin. Like having a baby made a woman ritually unclean, but obviously bringing life into the world isn't a sin. This is completely different from moral uncleanness, which is actual, legitimate, sinful behavior that spiritually separates you from God. Ritual uncleanness was really just a teaching tool.
So let's look at how these teaching tools actually played out in daily life. Dietary laws forced the Israelites to pause and think about God's standard of separation every single time they sat down to eat. Childbirth laws highlighted that the very foundation of life is sacred and belongs entirely to God. Skin disease laws, those served as a super vivid visual reminder of bodily decay and the reality of the fall. So rather than just shaming people, these laws acted as daily reminders of the permeating stain of the fall, constantly showing the Israelites how much they needed God's restoration in literally every part of their lives.
Moving right along to Section 4, the Holiness Code, Practical Ethics in the Community.
You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Now, you might think this famous golden rule started in the New Testament with Jesus, right? But actually, scratch that. It originated right here in Leviticus. It forms the absolute moral heartbeat of the entire Old Testament.
And far from being just an outdated rulebook, this holiness code pretty much pioneered modern social justice. That ancient command to leave the corners of your field unharvested for the poor, that's essentially a blueprint for social welfare. The command to not withhold a worker's wages overnight lays the literal groundwork for fair labor ethics. Not showing partiality demands judicial fairness. This brilliantly illustrates that true holiness is incredibly practical. It's not just about temple rituals, it dictates everything from your business ethics to exactly how you treat the most vulnerable people in your community.
Which takes us to our final section, Section 5, the Ultimate Atonement, Fulfilling the Sacrificial System. The Day of Atonement. This was the one day of the year the high priest actually entered the Holy of Holies, and it involved 2 goats. One innocent goat's blood was shed for the redemption of sins, but then the high priest would lay his hands on the second goat, the scapegoat, confess the sins of the whole nation, and release it out to the wilderness. This unbelievably vivid ceremony taught them that God doesn't just forgive the stain of sin, He entirely removes the lethal burden of it right out of our presence.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the whole point of Leviticus. Everything from High Priest Aaron to the repeated animal sacrifices was just an Old Testament shadow. It was a blueprint. It could only cover sin temporarily. But the New Testament fulfillment, that's where Jesus Christ steps in as the ultimate high priest, offering himself as a perfect, once-for-all sacrifice that permanently removes sin. Leviticus is the grand setup for the glorious reality of Christ.
When you break down the English etymology of the word atonement, it's just so beautiful. It literally means at one mint. It's the process of entirely removing the dividing barrier of sin to make humanity and God completely at one with each other. It perfectly encapsulates God's ultimate goal from the very beginning of the story, bringing His broken people back into a unified, thriving relationship with Him.
Because Christ provided the ultimate sacrifice to bridge that massive gap, Paul issues us a huge challenge in Romans 12. But hey, before we look at that, if this explainer unlocked the Bible for you, be sure to head over to sermonacademy.com to sign up for more deep dives just like this one. And please consider supporting our mission at sermonacademy.com/donate so we can keep making these. Okay, look at this final challenge. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. So the question we really have to ask ourselves today is, what does it actually look like for you to be a living sacrifice fully dedicated to God in your everyday life?